drivable par 4. Joel Damon's going to give it a shot with the drive.
All right, we're recording. Welcome everyone to Sunday's event presented by Bezerra Spiritual Healing Center. We respect all religions and spiritual traditions. And before we go any farther, I would like to ask our sister Sunshine to provide us with an opening prayer.
Thank you, Brian. Welcome, everyone. Let us close our eyes and let us gently open our inner eyes, connecting first with Mother Earth through our feet. And let us connect with our breath, taking deep inhales and equally deep exhales to ground ourselves here and now in our beautiful physical form, connected to the earth. And let us also say hello to our heart center that keeps us here and connected to all of our brothers and sisters in all realms and in all levels. Thank you, dear heart. And now, let us open our third eye, our crown chakra, our minds, and let us say hello to God, first cause of all things, our Creator. Let us say hello to Jesus, our guide and model. Let us say hello to Mother Mary, His mother. And now let us welcome the mentors of this group, Dr. Bezerra, just to mention a few, Dr. Paolo, Sister Shayla. Let us also say hello to the healing doctors, Dr. Augusto, Dr. Filomeno de Miranda. Let us also welcome Reverend Romy and all of our own mentors and healing guides and healing doctors. Let us also warmly welcome all our familial spirits and certainly all spirits who are here eager to learn alongside of us, opening their and our hearts and minds to the teachings that will come through today through our dear brother Peter Hayes and his guides. We welcome you warmly. Thank you, God, for the sublime opportunity to meet in your name with your Son's guidance today, at this very moment in our lives, to feel the love and the unification between us, knowing that we're all united as children of God. Thank you for being present. And as we move forward, we feel our hearts connected, our minds focused, releasing all other worldly concerns, supporting dear Peter Hayes and his presentation. We thank you. We thank you deeply for this moment. And so be it. And so it is. Thank you.
You, Sunshine. Bezerra Spiritual Healing Center is a member of the United States Spiritist Federation, where the beliefs are around scientific, philosophical, and religious principles of Spiritism, the triangle, so to speak. The Spirit Manual has taught us that knowledge and love are the wings for our spiritual evolution. Therefore, we have two parts to our event today. First, the speaking, and we'll shortly introduce Peter Hayes and his presentation. But during the Peter's presentation, participation is important. And your mentors are here and supporting you with insights from the speaker. for reflection and working along the week to sustain the energy that is provided during the presentation here today. And the second part, where you're being prepared as well during the presentation for the hands-on healing. This time, I would like to share events that are taking place throughout the week for Zerha Spiritual Healing Center. You can see on the screen every day at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, we have a daily prayer where we come together and as a group, we share our desires, our thoughts, our concerns with God and for the well-being of all those on the Bezerra Spiritual Healing list, as well as all our brothers and sisters, because together we are one big family and we are here for each other during this daily prayer. As you can see on Sundays, we have the service that takes place usually between 10 a.m. and 11:30, which we are doing right now. And then in the evening, between 6:30 and 7:30, there's the study of Nasalar, fabulous book, and you can link at this website link that's for the meeting for that, as well as all the other events, which I'll shortly describe. On Monday, from 6:30 to 8:30, it's an internal healing service by the BSH membership group. On Tuesdays, there's 6:30 to 7:30, Introduction into Spiritism, the book study group at Divine Light. And on Wednesdays, if you so need fraternal assistance, please let us know in the chats, and one of our members will reach out to you to provide an appointment time for that. It could be for you or for someone that you know who's in need. And then at 6:30 to 7:30 on Wednesdays, it's a study of Heaven and Hell by Allan Kardec. And then on Thursdays, Living Spring, the book, from 6:30 to 7:30 study. And then every second Thursday of each month, we have a study session in person, but you can connect online where we study the gospel. And the second half is at the physical location for healing, but you can always participate astrally, of course. And then, as you can see, Fridays and Saturdays are open for you to go about your business as you see fit. And those are the announcements. Are there any other announcements that need to be aired at this time? Okay.
I just want to share that we are almost finalizing the new BSH website, and I am super excited for that. Mark is giving us a huge work and hand and support. So hopefully soon we'll be able to launch the new website. Just wanted to get everybody excited with us.
Beautiful. And at Divine Light in November, we will start studying this book, which is called On the Canvas of the Infinite. It is by the Spirit Vicea de Menezes and Camilo Castillo Branco.
As a reminder, our website is located at bshcenter.org. So at this time, I'd like to introduce our speaker today, Peter Hayes, who will be presenting on Faith Can Move Mountains. Peter is a worker at Spiritist Group Love and Light in Newark, New Jersey, where he has been an active member for over 25 years. He is a regular participant in the Tri-State Spiritist Federation, and in 2021, he joined the board of directors of the United States Spiritist Federation as Director of Outreach. He has done lectures in English about Spiritism within the United States and has participated in several U.S. Spiritist symposiums. Peter loves to play guitar and has taught at Spiritist Group Love and Light. He has a long background in theater as a playwright, literary manager, electrician, and carpenter. Peter has published several children's books with his wife, Brazilian author Betty Rosenk Weg. I hope I pronounced that.
Rosenstein.
Okay.
Rosenstein.
Thank you, Peter. Through their company, Sem Fronteiras Press, hopefully I pronounced that as well, right? And with publishers in Brazil and Colombia. Please mute your cell phones and mute yourself so that we don't have any interference. And if you have a question to ask, feel free to unmute yourself and ask the question during the presentation. The floor is yours, Peter. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all for having me. Let me share this. Hey, so it is a pleasure to be here. Appreciate the invitation to come back and speak at BSH again. Faith can move mountains. This presentation is based on chapter 19 from the Gospel according to Spiritism, primarily that chapter. And when we think about the subject of faith, let's just start with some basic definitions of faith a la Webster Dictionary. The first definition is an allegiance to duty or a person or loyalty. The second is belief and trust in God, an external force or an inner experience. 3, complete trust. And 4, system of religious beliefs. It's interesting that in 2 of these definitions, the word trust comes, which is a suggestion of letting go, let go and let God, so to speak, but also that faith is certainly an inner experience as well. When we talk about allegiance to duty or a person, it will talk about different qualities of faith, but hopefully that is a generally positive impulse. The system of religious beliefs will touch on that in different ways as well. In the Gospel according to Spiritism, chapter 19, it opens with the moment from Matthew chapter 17, in which Jesus is approached by the father of a boy who suffers from epilepsy. And the father tells Jesus that his son suffers terribly, that he falls in the fire, he falls in the water, and that he tried to go to the apostles that are with Jesus, and they were not able to cure him. And then Jesus famously says, "Oh, unbelieving and twisted generation, how long will you be with me?" And he finally says, "Bring the boy to me." And Jesus is able to cast out the gospel. The Bible uses the word demon. I think Spiritists would understand it as an obsessor spirit. But Jesus is able to remove the obsessor spirit pretty much immediately. Now, the apostles who could not heal the boy are embarrassed, and they quietly and privately go to him and say, "Why couldn't we heal him?" And Jesus said, "Because you have so little faith." And then he says his famous phrase, "If you have faith the grain of a mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, 'Move from here to there,' and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you." Now, this passage, it might be very easy to get hung up on the phrase, "move this mountain," if one is taking the mountain literally. But before we get to that, when Jesus says unbelieving and twisted generation, and he seems perhaps slightly dismayed, that's one way to think about it. We don't know for sure what his tone was, but maybe it was more just a matter-of-fact statement. But Jesus was commenting on the way in which maybe we are twisted if our intentions are out of alignment, so to speak, and we align ourselves towards behaviors and impulses that can short-circuit our faith. And when he talks about moving the mountain. The way that chapter 19 in the Gospel According to Spiritism interprets that is we're not talking about literal mountains, we're talking about emotional mountains. This is a commentary about the mountains we create for ourselves. For example, the prejudices of routine. What happens when any of us get into a particular mindset in which we are consciously or unconsciously blocking ourselves, or we're locking ourselves, blocking ourselves, and preventing ourselves from connecting to a state of being outside of ourselves? The prejudice of routine could mean that we have a habit of seeing the world a certain way and getting used to it and a little too comfortable with it. There's also material interest and selfishness. With material interest, it can be simply that we see the world only in the here and now, only what we can see through our physical eyes, not our spiritual eyes, so to speak, and that we have, therefore, a limited way of experiencing life. Selfishness, of course, can mean that maybe we are motivated by some kind of agenda. Perhaps the apostles were trying to show off a little bit and thinking, here we are hanging out with this guy, Jesus, and yeah, we can cure the boy, just bring him over to us. And they may have thought that they were able to do this. But the fact that they weren't, there's an interesting commentary here about what their deeper intentions really were. Were they truly ready to utilize faith in the most positive and effective way possible? What about if we are trapped by the blindness of fanaticism? Well, being stuck in the blindness of fanaticism can mean a lot of things, but one of them certainly is that we are stuck in a belief system in which we just absolutely refuse to look beyond that belief system. We create a construct for ourselves, you could call it a prison, in which we are closed off. And of course, fanaticism often is very synonymous with intolerance, inflexibility, and so forth. What about prideful passions? Again, perhaps we are all like those apostles, and if we're wanting to show off, or if we think that we're more able to do something than we really can, because we haven't fully understood what it means to serve, for instance. Prideful passions, of course. Interestingly, in this sentence alone, we see selfishness and prideful passions. And as I'm sure you all know, in the third part of the Spirit's book, under the laws of progress, selfishness and pride are the two biggest obstacles to progress. And those, of course, are internal struggles that we can all face. So those are just some of the numerous mountains, and one could come up with several others as well. The commentary goes on to point out that when we have a more, shall we say, robust faith, even a genuine faith, there is a kind of energy and perseverance that can come with it. And we have that feeling that we're able to overcome obstacles, any obstacles, both the small things as well as the great ones. So how we face the path that we're on at the moment, how we face the struggles that we have in front of us, there are more options than we might think. And we often short circuit our ability to do things because we don't think we're going to make it. And as it says here in this passage, when we have a wavering faith, there's a certain uncertainty, hesitation, that kind of thing. This can be unconscious, by the way. It's not that the apostles didn't think they could heal, but on some level, they hoped or thought they could, and maybe believed in that moment that they could heal the boy, and yet there was something deeper from within them that was preventing them. And there's that kind of uncertainty, but then there's the one here that is being commented on, which is a little more conscious, I think, because it points out that we don't seek to win because we do not believe that we can win. Certainly, if somebody doesn't have faith in their ability to do something, they panic, they get afraid, and that can be the biggest killer of trying to accomplish a certain task. But also when we think about the attributes of faith, I've been implying it without saying it directly, that faith certainly is a type of confidence. But when we say confidence in relation to faith, we have to be clear and careful about what we mean by that. Confidence does not mean controlling. Faith is calm, patient, and knows how to wait. The rest of this passage talks about what happens when we don't get things the way we wanted them to, and then we start to get angry, impatient. In short, perhaps we are trying to be controlling. But having faith that is calm, patient, and knows how to wait is another way of understanding that we simply have control over certain things and other things we simply do not. It's that famous phrase, let go and let God, which has a lot of wisdom in it, because sometimes we know that this is the right moment to act. We have to really go for it and try to get certain things done. And other times it isn't. Maybe the best thing we should do is just hold back, coast along a little bit. That's not a sign of laziness. It's a sign of knowing when we have the ability to accomplish something, and other times we have to wait. But also, this section, this is item 4 in chapter 19 of Gospel According to Spiritism, by the way. It's important that we don't confuse faith with presumption. Were the apostles presumptuous in thinking they could cure the boy? It certainly looks like it, yes. But the emphasis here is that true faith is blended with humility. And the important thing, again, there is that having humility and blending that with confidence means that we can be confident, but we're also at peace and we're calm, we're accepting of whatever occurs. We're not trying to show off, we're not trying to impress anybody with how brilliant we are and that kind of thing. But we're also learning how to be humble in ways that are essential to making sure that we don't overstep, so to speak, by thinking we're able to do something by not knowing ourselves well enough and then suffering the consequences. And then it says here that those who possess it, that is humility, place their trust in God more than in themselves. So yes, we can have confidence in ourselves. We need that. There's nothing wrong with self-esteem. But at the same time, do we put our faith in a higher power? This also is suggesting that none of us are little islands unto ourselves. We are individuals, of course. Spiritism stresses the individuality of the spirit, and that individuality continues as far into the future as we know. We're described as immortal spirits, but we're all also, of course, very much a part of a larger fraternity, a larger sense of being, a larger state of consciousness, and so forth. What is meant by the power of faith? Well, chapter 19 makes the following comment. I'll read this to you. The power of faith receives direct and special application of magnetic action. Through it, humans are able to act on the universal cosmic fluid, modifying its qualities and giving it an almost irresistible impulsion. This is why those already possessing great normal fluidic power, when impelled by an ardent faith, can, by directing their will toward good alone, operate these strange phenomena of cures and others which formerly passed for miracles, but actually are only the consequences of a natural law. This is the reason why Jesus said to his apostles, "You could not heal because of your little faith." All right, there's a few things in this. when we talk about universal cosmic fluid, if we look at question 27 from the Spirits book, cosmic principles described as being the intermediary between spirit and matter. The body is too crude for a spirit to act on it directly. This opens up a few hints that I'm going to touch on in the next few minutes. If the spirit is described as the soul and the paraspirit, and a human being is described as a soul, paraspirit, and body, and the paraspirit, therefore, is the link between the spirit and the body, there's an implication that if we're able to act on the universal cosmic principle, it is through an ability we have via our spirits, that the body itself creates certain obstacles, so to speak. And Genesis, the book Genesis, the fifth book in the codification, chapter 14, item 1, points out there are natural laws that, quote, govern spiritual life, that we can find the key to miracles of this category. This chapter is about fluids. And the next chapter, chapter 15, talks about what miracles, he could say in quote, that are attributed to Jesus, but explains that really what was going on were certain natural laws. I'll say more about that in a moment. The implication of this is that the phenomenon which the spiritual element has a preponderant part cannot be explained solely by the laws of matter, escape the investigations of science. Now, this gets into an area that Spiritism tries to stress about the difference between the spiritual world, the non-physical world, and the physical world. Science, of course, can study the physical world. And when we talk about natural laws, or the laws that govern life here on Earth, we're talking about laws that govern matter. But the Spiritist codification stresses that there are spiritual laws, or laws that govern the spiritual world, that are just as real. But these cannot be observed in the same way that, say, the laws of physics can be observed and replicated and verified. So when it makes this comment here at the bottom about the laws of matter, and I mentioned before in that long passage from chapter 19 about quoting, in which it talks about following natural laws, making use of the universal cosmic principle. These are abilities that the spirit can have, which don't necessarily fall under a microscope and can be easily observed. And in chapter 15 of Genesis, it talks a little bit more about Jesus's ability. And there's some interesting comments here. This is chapter 15, item 2. That as a human being, that Jesus had the organization of fleshy beings, so he had a body just like we did, but because he's a pure spirit, he was detached from matter. He was living more the spiritual life rather than the bodily life. And it mentions that his superiority over humans had nothing to do with the qualities of his body, but rather those of his spirit, that his spirit dominated matter in an absolute way, and those of his paraspirit drawn from the most quintessential part of earth fluids. The ability to engage in psychic activity is driven by the paraspirit. And that comment is made in, I believe it's in Genesis. But also it mentions here something that is touched on in the Medium's book about how, for instance, objects can be moved by a spirit. A spirit is making use of the energies coming from an incarnate who's nearby. Sometimes nearby sometimes may not be so nearby. But the energies of the incarnate, the spirit is infusing an object with its energies the energies of the incarnate and the available energies around. So at the end of this sentence here in front of you about Jesus, his paraspirit was drawing from the most quintessential, in other words, the most purest form of Earth's fluids. I believe it's in Evolution 2 Worlds that it talks about how the energies of a spirit of a higher level are constant. The energies from Earth are constant. But when a spirit is trying to work with an incarnate being, the energies that an incarnate might be emitting may or may not be reliable, so to speak, because of the person involved. By the way, the medium's book does stress that if an object is being moved by a spirit, and this is normally a low-level type of behavior from a lower-level spirit, generally speaking, the incarnate whose energies might be used, this could easily be happening without that incarnate having any idea what was going on. But this passage, this commentary about Jesus that's in front of us, is emphasizing that his ability to work miracles, so to speak, he was working with the energy of his spirit. After all, when he helps the boy who suffers from epilepsy, he wasn't necessarily curing him of all the physical causes of epilepsy, which were certainly there, but rather he was removing the obsessor spirit, who was, we can assume, exasperating the epilepsy. The boy falls into the fire, falls into the water, as if he has no control. Now, epilepsy, there is a physiological explanation for epilepsy, and depending upon the severity of it, it's something that when someone's having a seizure, they don't have control. But was in the case of this boy, was it being exasperated? And Jesus, having second sight, could see that there was indeed an obsessor spirit, and he was able to remove it. But it was through the power of his spirit working with, with the energies available to him that he was able to remove the spirit. It goes on to say in Genesis chapter 15 that his soul, Jesus, was to hold on to the body only through the strictly necessary links. Being constantly released, it had to give it second sight, not only permanent, but of exceptional penetration, which was well in excess of the one found in ordinary human beings. And that the same applied to all phenomena that depend on the paraspirit or psychical fluids. Again, the ability to engage in psychic activity is the result of the paraspirit. And the higher quality of these fluids gave him an immense magnetic power, seconded by an unceasing desire to do good. It's mentioned in the commentary from chapter 19 of the Gospel, the one I read to you before, that part of what was happening when, in the case of curing the boy from epilepsy, was to draw on magnetic power, magnetism, and so forth. But it's also combined with having faith. Now, what's interesting is Jesus describes faith as what? A mustard seed, a tiny amount. That would suggest that faith is, you need to have it, but it's not the dominant component in it, that it's more an emotional state as well as the state of our spirituality and the ability for us to transcend the limitations that we might have thought were there in the first place. In chapter 19 of the Gospel according to Spiritism, it talks about religious faith, the state of unshakable faith. And this is getting into the subject of a reasoned faith versus blind faith. And generally speaking, from a religious point of view, faith is usually believing in some kind of dogma or another. But it also says that faith can be reasoned faith or blind. And then it talks about the problems of blind faith. Blind faith, of course, is when we are simply told something is true and we don't bother to do any further inquiry, and we just accept it without question. In other words, as it says here, we're encouraged to examine nothing. And in many ways, we're being asked to take our reason and just throw it out the window. And so when this kind of faith collides against evidence and reason, when this goes to an extreme, it can be a major cause of fanaticism. After all, in order to continue as a fanatic, one has to not listen to reason at all or anything that's contrary to what one wants to believe. Now, religion often gets criticized when it perpetrates blind faith. And, an obvious example would be people who say believe in the Bible literally. Obviously, Spiritism does not. It's a very strong advocate for not taking the Bible literally. That's what the gospel, according to Spiritism, is about in many ways, is don't take what is written there literally. And it's more of a guide, not to be taken literally. But if I am a fanatic in that way, and I insist that the Bible is the literal truth, no ifs, ands, or buts, it doesn't matter what other people say to me, I will deny it. It doesn't conveniently fit within my belief system. And the point being made here is that faith that sits on blind faith, it is really like a house of cards. It's a little bit like Jesus's comment in the Sermon on the Mount, chapters 5 through 7 in the Gospel of Matthew. I believe it's in chapter 7 of that part of the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus sums up his teachings. If you've never read Sermon on the Mount, it's a wonderful summary of Jesus's essential teachings, many of them. But he also says, if you do not put these into practice, it's as if we're building our house, our spiritual house, if you will, on sand. Whereas if we are able to put these things into practice, then we're building our house on rock. So emotionally speaking, what is our spiritual house built on? Sand or rock? If it's built on sand, then when turbulent winds come along, in other words, we're being challenged, for instance, we could easily collapse because the foundation of who we are is on shaky ground to begin with. Whereas if our foundation is emotionally strong, then we're on rock. And faith is connected to this because if we have a reasoned faith, then we have faith that is based more on something that is truthful, something that will be true tomorrow as well as today. There's a nice commentary that continues in item 6 that says, when faith rests on error, it collapses sooner or later, the house on sand. When based on truth, it is only the one assured of lasting into the future, for it has nothing to fear from the progress of enlightenment. And then I love this last one. Since whatever is true in the shadow is also in broad daylight. So when our faith is based on reason, based on evidence, then it is on more solid ground, and we should not be afraid of anything new that comes along that may challenge what we thought to be true before. After all, when we talk about enlightenment, in order to have enlightenment, to receive enlightenment, we need to be flexible. If we're the inflexible fanatic, then what's the real foundation? Fear, the need to have everything exactly as I understand it right now, and that's it, and so forth. This raises a lot of different subjects that I might touch on as we go forward. But I want to focus on, there's a wonderful science book, it's a classic, from Richard Dawkins, and I'll tell you in a moment why I brought this into this presentation. Richard Dawkins is a fairly well-known science writer, and he's also a very outspoken atheist, and he tended to be very critical of religion. Usually in the realm of people who are creationists that deny evolution, for instance. That's maybe the simple target, so to speak. He's often challenged that worldview. Spiritists, by the way, are creationists too, in that spiritists believe in God. But the difference is that spiritists also embrace evolution and embrace science. But the reason I have this here is because Dawkins makes a point about faith. He says faith is a state of mind that leads people to believe something, it doesn't matter what, in the total absence of supporting evidence. He's talking about blind faith, but he's also pointing out, and this is true, what are some of the foundations of faith? If we know something is true empirically, in other words, empiricism meaning you can verify something to be true through replicated experiments that are carried out well to begin with, and you can replicate a truth over and over again, then it's no longer faith because it's true. When you know something is true and it's backed up by evidence, you don't need faith anymore. Okay, but does everything fall under that category? Well, there's a book by John Lennox called Gunning for God, and he challenges it says the new atheist. Again, sometimes the people who really push for atheism are very quick to criticize the religious perspective, which in itself is a bigger subject. But his point is, we all know how to distinguish between blind faith and evidence-based faith. We are well aware that faith is only justified if there's evidence to back it up. Evidence-based faith is the normal concept on which we base our everyday lives. When Spiritism describes itself as being faith based on reason, obviously the more evidence we have, the better. But sometimes we don't have all the evidence we need for things. But this is also, people like Richard Dawkins are certainly confronting the dangers of blind faith. And this is something Spiritism agrees with, by the way, because in item 7 from chapter 19 of the Gospel, according to Spiritism, it points out that, the dogma of blind faith creates a bigger number of non-believers. And by its nature, blind faith is trying to impose something. If I tell all of you that Adam and Eve really existed, and I insist that you all believe me, and if you don't believe me, there's something wrong with you, then I'm trying to manipulate all of you into going, yes, Peter, Adam and Eve do exist. So that, of course, is a type of blind faith. But blind faith is in many ways connected to manipulation. And Spiritism, as you all know, advocates that we need to base our faith more on reason. But it also mentions that for some, faith comes easily. Why? Because a spirit may have had prior experience in cultivating faith. And therefore, having faith that comes more naturally can be a sign of previous involvement. It's also an interesting point is made that our relationship with faith is very personal. It's not up to me to tell any of you how you should develop faith. That's going to depend on your own individual journeys. And it's a process that we connect to more from within. Because it's, as it says here, it's not up to faith to look for people, but for people to look for faith. Since they seek it with sincerity, they will most certainly find it. But it's an internal process. Unshakable faith is only that which can meet reason face to face in every human epoch. So whatever we believe, it's not that we have to cling to that belief 100%. Part of having unshakable faith is that we know things will work out one way or another, or that life and its mysteries will reveal themselves more and more to us. And whatever comes along, we're okay with it. I think one way to think about this passage is, for instance, Kardec emphasizes that Spiritism embraces science, and if science proves once and for all that something we thought to be true is not correct, we should follow science. And we should not be afraid of that. We should not be afraid to be flexible as needed. But also, again, when we embrace reason, then that too can be part of the major foundation of an unshakable faith. Because again, Spiritism embraces having a reasoned faith. How do we understand the questions that we all have about the nature of our existence in such a way that we finally feel more at ease with what we believe is true to be true? How do we get there? Well, hopefully we're using reason, discernment, inquiry, and so forth. And that's what we're all encouraged to do. Again, just to repeat, whatever you all believe, it's not because I or somebody else tells you to believe it. You're encouraged to question everything, to be skeptical. You have to find your own way into how you understand yourself and the world that you operate in. How any of us understand the nature of our own existence. Now, I want to go back to something that was being touched on before. Richard Dawkins rightfully says that if we know something is true empirically, we don't need faith anymore. And John Lennox was saying, look, we don't buy blind faith either. And just to assume that anybody who's religious or spiritual only believes in blind faith is nonsense. But does that mean that everything neatly falls into 100% empirical evidence? No. Does everything neatly fall into reason or belief? Is something true just because we're using logic and reason? After all, Spiritism a lot of times does make logical arguments for things. And that's fine. Is that the same as empirical evidence? No. But how often do we have a scenario in which we have 100% empirical evidence or 100% reasoning, and that's it? Sometimes we have evidence. The more evidence we have, the better. But there are times where we do come to believe in something, but we don't necessarily have the evidence to back it up per se. Does that make it invalid? No. After all, we can have faith in something and we feel at peace with it, but it doesn't necessarily require that we have to have evidence for it. What if you can't? What if you can't get evidence? If you can get it later, wonderful. But scientists certainly can't explain everything. There's lots and lots of things they don't understand, and they know that. I want to take a moment to share a couple of passages from a book I really enjoyed called War of the World Views. And this was co-written by Deepak Chopra, the well-known author of spiritual matters, New Age type stuff, and so forth, and Leonard Mlodinow, who is a respected physicist and also a best-selling author, collaborated with Stephen Hawking on a book called The Grand Design. He's wrote a book called The Drunkard's Walk, How Randomness Rules Our Lives. He's taught at UC Berkeley, Caltech, have some of the most prestigious physics departments in the world and things like that. So the two of them debated some of these questions. And Deepak Chopra does not come from a position of traditional religion. He's kind of argues that he's moved beyond that, but he does embrace spirituality. And I want to focus first on a comment that this has to do with faith. And what role does faith play in our lives? We might assume, for instance, that all scientists might poo-poo the idea of faith, but that's not true, because Leonard Mlodinow says the following: whenever we face difficulties, challenges, or uncertainties, it can be helpful to hold beliefs that stretch beyond that which we know without question to be true. Faith, as William James put it, can be a great working hypothesis. This is as true for scientists as it is for anyone else. In fact, it's important for scientists to formulate such working hypotheses and then be willing to jettison them if they aren't borne out, because if we didn't, we would never move beyond our own knowledge of the universe. But then he challenges Deepak Chopra. But working hypotheses like Deepak's, which insist on the primacy of an immaterial world, or like the beliefs of those who deny evolution or embrace supernatural miracles, are at odds with our knowledge of the world, often in active conflict with the physical laws that govern it. Hence, they are flawed. So, to the extent that he is not one that necessarily, well, Leonard Mlodinow certainly describes himself as a materialist, does not believe in the immortality of the soul, and so forth. But at the same time, he also is acknowledging that in order to have faith in something, this type of faith is certainly a type of confidence, but it's also an acknowledgement that there are times when we don't know for sure if something's correct. We may believe it is, and it's okay to have that faith and to be in that position. But as I mentioned before, as Kardec encourages us, if something comes along that proves such and such to be true once and for all, or such and such is not true, are we able to move and go with science in that direction? But also, this commentary, I think, is pointing out that faith does play an important role in the nature of our existence. Now, Deepak Chopra, in another part of the book, does make a challenging statement. Science has never achieved pure objectivity, and it never will. Leonard Mlodinow, by the way, agrees with him about that, but says that we have to employ the scientific method rigorously enough, meaning verification. But the subjectivity of the person doing the experiment, their biases and so forth, have certainly affected the outcome, and that too is important to keep in mind. But Deepak Chopra says to deny the worth of subjective experience is to dismiss most of what makes life worth living: love, trust, faith, beauty, awe, wonder, compassion, truth, the arts, morality, and the mind itself. Part of what he's touching on here is making the point that, again, not everything that we experience can neatly fall within a purely empirical explanation. So by empirical, I mean you can prove this with evidence by replicating experiments. Many things do fall into that, but there are, of course, areas of the nature of our existence that don't, at the moment at least. Now, I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about the parable of the barren fig tree. This is also in chapter 19 from Gospel According to Spiritism. And the parable is that Jesus and the apostles are walking along, and Jesus is hungry. And he goes and he sees a fig tree, and he goes up closer to see if there are any figs. And there are not any figs because it's not the season for figs. And Jesus looks at the tree and says, "May you never produce fruit ever again." The next day, he and the apostles walk past the same tree, and it has shriveled up and is barren. And the apostles remembered what he said and said, "Rabbi, look, the tree that you cursed yesterday is no longer able to produce fruit." And Jesus says, "Truly I say to you, whoever says to this mountain, be taken up and thrown into the sea, and does not doubt in his heart, but believes that what he says will come to pass, it will be done for him." He goes on to say, "Therefore I tell you, whatever you ask in prayer, believe that you have received it, and it will be yours. And whenever you stand praying, forgive if you have anything against anyone, so that your Father who is in heaven may forgive you your trespasses. Certainly a comment about the importance of our ability to forgive. By the way, we just had Yom Kippur yesterday, and that's one of the important themes of Yom Kippur. That's the Day of Atonement, the Jewish holiday, Yom Kippur. Now, in chapter 19 of the Gospel according to Spiritism, it points out that the barren tree can be a symbolic representation of, say, those who appear elegant, perhaps speak well. If I come across as an eloquent speaker, that's nice, but am I actually saying anything that moves any of you? Perhaps I don't. If I don't, then I'm like the barren fig tree. Sometimes the barren fig tree can represent people who sound impressive, but at the end of the day, their house is really on sand, built on sand rather than on rock. So it has to do with people who have lots of potential but don't really utilize it fully. And this comment, of course, this passage also makes reference to mountains and being able to move the mountains. This makes more sense, I think, if we don't take the word mountain literally, of course, as mentioned before. But also this item 8 in chapter 19 from the Gospel according to Spiritism points out that another way to think about the barren fig tree is in relation to mediums, that the duty of mediums as interpreters of spirits, that they too are like trees which must give spiritual nourishment to their brothers and sisters. And if they misuse their mediumship, then they're liable to lose that ability. That too is a kind of faith, in the sense that having faith in one's abilities, again, faith is humility and being calm. It can also mean being confident, but not to the point of being arrogant. And it's also a way of saying that a medium is being able to serve on behalf of the good and wanting to serve for the right intentions and right purposes, which can also strengthen one's faith in oneself. Sometimes mediums do struggle with having faith in their own ability to give passivity. They may doubt themselves, they may question, they may be analyzing a little too much and things like that. And the ability to have mediumship, I'm not a medium, by the way, I work in a mediumistic meeting as a counselor, but from what I can see, it seems to me that part of being a medium is, again, that feeling of let go and let God, not trying to control things. As mentioned before, part of having faith is learning how to kind of ease off on the gas, so to speak, and just allow things to happen. Faith is described as the parent of hope and charity in chapter 19. And it mentions that hope and charity are really a consequence of faith. And together, these three are an inseparable trinity. And part of the point that's made is, if faith is regarded as the divine inspiration of God, and it awakens to all those noble instincts that lead to a person, it is the foundation for a person's spiritual renovation. Again, the suggestion that our ability to have faith and make use of faith is an inward process. It is the ability to use the Spirit in a way connecting to the universal cosmic principle, that sort of thing. But it's also, what is our faith really based on? What is the genuine foundation? It's emphasizing that, of course, it must be strong, that when we doubt ourselves, that it becomes that house built on sand. It emphasizes that when we have an unshakable foundation, then even when we're challenged, perhaps people slander us, people criticize us, the kinds of things that if we lack self-esteem may make us crumble a little bit, or at least feel knocked off guard. But if we have a genuine faith, in other words, if we have a stronger sense of who we really are, and that what we're doing is following the right path. By following the right path, it doesn't mean we can't be wrong sometimes. Again, we always need humility, but we still feel that overall we're in the right direction. The direction we're moving in. What I'm doing makes sense. What I'm doing makes sense for now. Yes, there is a future. There's a future worth working for. Those are examples of having faith. It also mentions that, faith has to be based on verification too. By verification, again, if you have solid evidence, wonderful. The more the better. But if you don't, are you making assumptions that are built on reasonable, credible arguments in favor of those assumptions? And then it goes on to say, love God, but understand why you love it. That's a tough one. Do we know for ourselves why we love God? If we do, wonderful. But that too is also a personal journey that every one of us has to make on our own. Believe in God's promises, but know why you believe. We're being invited here to actively make an effort to think and reflect and feel and experience what it means to really have a genuine faith, a reasoned faith, to put our trust in God. Do we just put our trust in God because we're told to, or because we found a way within ourselves that goes, oh yeah, that's it. That makes sense. Another section in chapter 19 is divine faith and human faith. And it mentions that when we think of faith only in the religious perspective, again, that might be the religious dogma. I don't mean to be picking on religion all the time in saying this, but if it's just dogma, I tell you, you're going to burn in hell forever, and of course you're going to believe me, that kind of thing. But this is saying that Christ showed, quote, what humans can do when they have faith that is the will to want and the certainty that this can achieve its fulfillment. Did not the apostles work miracles? Well, the journey that the apostles go on is, of course, a revealing one. I know I'm going to start to wrap up, but I do want to mention the experience of Peter, for instance. There is the moment in the New Testament where Peter and the apostles are in a boat, and the boat is caught in the middle of a storm, and they're afraid, and they see Jesus walking on water. It's his spirit. And Peter finally says to Jesus, "Can I join you?" And Jesus says, "Yes, come." And Peter starts to get out, and we're told, walk on water. And Peter's fine until the storm gets a little more intense and he becomes scared. And what happens? Kaboom. He goes right into the water. And Jesus says to him, "O ye of little faith." And Jesus pulls him out and rescues him. It is a moment where Peter is like, okay, he does it. He doesn't question it in the beginning, but then when he becomes more self-conscious, that gets him into trouble. But to Peter's credit, we see Peter struggling with his faith, as I think all the apostles did when they were with Jesus. Of course, famously, Peter denies Jesus, as Jesus told him he would during the Last Supper, that when Jesus is arrested and tried, that Peter would deny him 3 times. And Peter says, "No, Lord, I would never do that." And then once the crow cocks, Peter just goes, "Oh my God, what have I done? I did exactly what he said I would do." And then to Peter's credit, the journey he goes through with Jesus is very much about him developing the right foundation for his faith. And then in Acts of the Apostles, chapter 2, where Peter is with John at the Second Temple, and there is a person who cannot walk, described as a cripple, who is brought there every day, and he's been doing this for years, and he asks for money, and Peter looks at him and says, "Look at me. I do not have any silver or gold, but I will give you what I do have." And then he says, "In the name of Jesus, walk." And Peter just picks him, lifts up this man who could not walk, and he's able to walk. And he goes into the Second Temple, and he can't believe it. And this moment is, again, a representation of how Peter has started to develop a sense of faith and himself that took him a while to get there. And soon after that, we start seeing the signs that Peter and the other apostles are going to carry the torch after all, despite being demoralized during the Passion, and the Christian church will be born. Item 12 also says, "Now, what were such miracles if not natural effects whose cause was unknown to humans then, but which is largely explained today, and which will be completely understood through the study of Spiritism and magnetism?" Again, as mentioned before, Jesus, through the power of his Spirit, was able to carry out certain activities that were called miracles, but the argument in Genesis chapter 15 is that these were actually natural laws. They just weren't being understood, but natural laws that affect the spiritual world. So what is faith? As I start to wrap up, people are right to say faith is vanishing, but it is the faith in everything that shocks common sense and reason that is vanishing. In chapter 19, it points out, we have entered a new era. If we're talking about the mid-19th century, certainly going before that, age of enlightenment in the 18th century, leading into the 19th century, and certainly where we are today, we have entered a new era in which blind faith doesn't work anymore. Deepak Chopra, in that book, War of the World Views, argues, he's arguing for the spiritual perspective of things, and he debates a respected scientist, but he also says blind faith has no place in today's world. We have to have faith that is based on reason and evidence. But it also says faith in serious things, faith in God and immortality is always alive in the hearts of humans. This is something many, many people believe in. It is something that resonates throughout a variety of cultures throughout the world. Faith in the innate feeling that exists in every human being of their future destiny. We don't know what our future is. We can't say with any real certainty, but we still have faith that things will be okay, that we have a future. I'm sure you have this at your center. We certainly do at ours, but like if there are problems that happen between people or something is going on, we certainly do our part. We may need to talk, and make sure that we're resolving matters to the extent we can, but we also put our trust in spirituality. Sometimes things just sort of resolve themselves, and it happens very nicely. It's not a guarantee, of course, but the point I'm making is having faith also means, make an obvious point, we don't control everything every step of the way. It's not possible, but that doesn't mean something isn't happening. The universe is conspiring in our favor, you might say. It says here, it is the awareness that they have immense faculties whose germ has been deposited in them, in latent state at first, and which must hatch and grow through each person's active will. So we are all like seeds. The spirit is like a seed. We have some abilities, and we will develop more abilities as we go on. It is part of the nature of our existence. Do we utilize our brains fully? Not by a long shot. That's something science can tell us. Do we utilize our spirituality fully? No, doesn't mean we won't. But Jesus is pointing out to us that this and much more is possible to us. I'd like to thank all of you for listening. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Peter. As you went about the whole presentation, I'm thinking, what am I going to say? What am I going to say at the end? And I said, Brian, just have faith that whatever you're going to say, it's going to come to you. And what came to me at the end is that I recall in 1997, I was in North Dakota, and I went to an Indian reservation in search of a shaman. And I had announced myself in the beginning when I walked onto the premises. I went to the administrator's office, and they called an officer to come to me, and the officer his name was Bear, which I had learned later that Bear is part of my animal totem. It's very strong in my life. And I said, why do you want to see the shaman? I said, I'm here on a vision quest. And he goes, a vision quest is a lifetime. And, as we discover more in Spiritism, a lifetime is the infinity of our lives, from one life, a body, to the next, and in the spirit world and back into the body. But basically what I'm trying to make a point here is that to have faith, it doesn't happen overnight, just like the vision quest doesn't happen in one moment. It's the accumulation of experiences from one life to the next. I feel I understand and know faith and have a greater depth of faith within me, but it's the humility that leads me to the expansion of the truth that keeps unfolding, and I can't close myself off to that. I've learned more about faith and thinking more about faith of your presentation, but it just does not stop here. Thank you very much for today's presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, not hearing anyone go ahead, I'll go ahead.
Ben? Yeah, I guess.
I want to talk about that prejudice of routine, which really kept my attention
Okay.
at the beginning. But I must say that I got a little lost with the barren fig tree. It seemed to me it was punished out of season. But anyway, my point is about the prejudice of routine. I feel that you could probably have spent almost this entire time on just that part alone. For me, it represents this. If you're trying to tell someone something and you want them to see your point of view, they may, but they may not, because of their prejudice of routine, because they're used to seeing things their way,
right,
and your way, so they stay stuck on their way. And so there's no change. So when talking about faith and even the possibility, let me give you an example that I think most of us can relate to, especially since I like languages. I'll use languages. Most people believe, as an adult, that they cannot learn a language. Now, there is evidence, part of your discussion here, to demonstrate that one can, in adulthood, learn a language. But if you believe that you can't, guess what? You really find yourself not being able to do it.
right.
Or finding it to be a huge struggle to do that. So that's prejudice again of routine, because you said, I can't do it, so you don't do it. So you can't see the possibilities of doing it. And then you hear about people living in a place for 20 years and never acquiring the language of the place that they are. So there's that prejudice. And then lastly, when you spoke about Jesus healing more out of spirit than the human frame.
Mhm.
That was powerful to me. And
Hmm.
that was really powerful because that's another shift in thinking, if you will, or getting out of that prejudice of routine. So it's a lot to
Yes,
work on and a lot to work with. Thank you for your presentation.
thank you.
Yeah, and that is very important, Ken, bringing the healing, the healing of faith. And you say something, Peters, as a medium, no? Um, you have to have faith
Mhm.
because remember Ananias, no? When Jesus appeared to him and told him to heal Paul,
Mhm.
the persecutors of the Christians at that time. And what is that? Obedience. Obedience and faith in Jesus.
Mhm.
Because Jesus taught them and how to believe, no? So be a medium. Sometimes, as our group is dedicated for healing, it's very tough because when we open our center, when we were there in California, open physically for people come all over. We don't know where they come, how many come, and how they were. So, but we open the doors every Sunday, 10 a.m., as we're still doing. And people come all over with a lot of illnesses. People were in a hospice, or people was tired searching for healing in doctors, hospital, and everything they could not find. And they have a faith because that group, not Tanya, no Greg, because we are just servant.
Mhm.
And saying that to you in many years of service, I wake up and I say, God, I cannot do anything without you, but with you and your love in me and through our group and the meetings, let everyone who comes today receive even that a word of faith, I said, they can
Mhm.
transport their mountains of emotional illnesses in their soul. Because that is you right when you said that the mountain is emotional. And it's so true because I'm getting emotional here. I'm sorry. Because when we are a sensitive medium and you can feel the people burden, the heaviness on their soul,
Burden.
burden,
Burden. Mhm. Yeah.
forgive me, and the heaviness on their souls of uh, angry, try to putting faith in humans, no? Try to putting faith in other things, but and then the challenge they go through life, and anger, sadness, and hatredness, and egotistic way, we will see this mountain can be dissolved, and the moment of you say, God, this is my burden, I give this to you. No, I can go to you like today, I receive a blessing on your speech. No, that is a blessing, it resonate with my soul, what I believe, and a word that you brought to me and say, wow, that is the eureka, no? So many people, when we are conscious, a conscious being, a conscious son or daughter of God, practicing the truth, because other things is very important on your speech, to believe in truth and truth people. Everyone has your truth, but when we speak the truth, you must search for that truth. Is a pure truth, which is what he believes, or there is a lot of people brings the same beliefs and people together, gather together on that truth. So that is a very important. We can change the world if we start to think about that, not have a blind faith because I believe in that man or that woman or that healer. We don't know. We don't know. It is a very important message that you sent today. I really appreciate your speech. And I really ask everyone who are here listen today or will be listening after on YouTube, please take care of your mountain. No? Scan your mountain. And we can change this mountain. We can change the mountain of ingratitude, lack of faith, or all lack of other things, that we can dissolve this mountain and create this beautiful, beautiful place that God had built inside of us, the temple of God. Thank you so much for your speech.
Thank you.
Appreciate that so much.
I have a comment. I think about faith the same thing that Carl Gustav Jung, Freud's pupil and friend, said. They asked him in an interview if you believe in God, and he said yes. But at his old age, they asked him, "Do you believe in God?" He said, "Now I don't, because I know Him." So you should believe in the things that you don't know yet. It's like having evidence. It's no longer faith. So I know God, but how do I know God? It's not because I read it. It's not because I saw the movies. It's because I heard the conference. It's because it came from within. And I can't describe how God it is, but it will take years to do that because there's so many things inside. I don't know how I got it. It's the only idea that I have is by virtue of learning and virtue of growing, somebody has removed some layers that allow me to see that. So faith has to be coming from within. And when you're certain, as Jesus mentioned about the mustard, you move the mountains. And I do believe now I have absolute faith. So much faith that I'm thinking I'm living in the spiritual world already. So that is what faith does to you. So thank you, because you pointed out every single thing that I have read about faith, including that barren tree that didn't produce the figs. That had me thinking for a while until I understood what it meant. Thank you.
I went over that moment quickly. I think part of what the barren fig tree represents is, for instance, trying to impose blind faith on others, is one way of thinking of it. Or if we lack faith in some way, or we question what we're doing, we become like that barren fig tree. For the moment, at least, not permanently.
Thank you, Peter. Great presentation.
Okay, thank you.
A lot of food for thought for us to digest. It reminds me of a presentation we heard here earlier this year. And the phrase is, no doubt. There can be no doubt. That is faith. And I just think your perspective today is, just wonderfully fresh and reassuring. We're all on the right path, or I am anyway. And the learning is never ending.
Oh, yeah.
So again, thank you.
I think we're reminded of that constantly. Yeah.
Thank you, Peter. I'm Teresa. I live up in Vermont.
Hi, Teresa. Yeah.
So you're not the barren fig tree. You really did stimulate my thinking. And thinking about, really embracing the difference between resignation and indifference. And, we know the gospel, resignation comes from the heart. It's consent from the heart, and indifference can just be, oh, well, whatever, it's convenient. So you really stimulated my thinking in that way. And I was thinking that because some of these stories are hard to hear, that, things how Jesus replied. Like you said, we don't know the tone, but it seems a little like, ouch,
Ouch. Yeah.
But sometimes I think about the barren fig tree, just like the blind man when he met when the apostles said, "Why is this guy blind? Because of his parents?" He did. He said neither. It was just there so he could teach a lesson, so that people could learn. I was thinking that about the fig tree, that possibly just to show the apostles, the intention of our word, what it's backed with, and that belief that, we can move mountains, that them saying that to the tree, and they caught it. We said this the other day and looked out. So anyway, who knows? But what I want to ask you, and please don't feel that being confrontational, but I believe this, that the doctrine says, if science finds something new, follow it, and especially when it's science. But where does it say that? I mean, I have looked, I don't find it. So, I mean, is it just something applied that spiritism or spiritists have pulled of the codification, or is there an actual place?
Yeah, my understanding is it's in posthumous works, which is not available in English. Now, if one of you can verify if that's correct or not, please do.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. I always wondered where it is. So thank you.
But I think it makes sense to me that Kardec would say that. It's really the spirit.
Like I said, I don't say it's sensational or challenging. It's just I could never find it, and I heard day one of coming to Spiritism. So thank you so much. I appreciate that, and it was really good to see you.
Okay,
I will find for you, because I have read that too. I will find and give to you. Okay.
Okay.
Mosin, you're muted.
Thank you, Peter, for this nice presentation. Especially for the young people, it is very important to know when we say that Jesus said that when you have faith and move the mountain, what it means. Sometimes it brings the misunderstanding that they think nobody can do that. That you open that very nicely, that the mountain, when we say, is that the nature mountain, that is something within you, the mountain that we make ourselves within us. And sometimes we say, I have a mountain of work to do. And this is the problem, that we have the mountain that we make with ourselves, and we cannot come out of that. And that was very nice that you opened that. When we have a little, when we believe as a child and something, and it grows and grows and grows and become a faith that we have. And with this faith, really, I problem myself. I did with this faith, my cancer away was healed. My I explained it myself, and right now there is a book that a doctor took 3,000 people who had cancer, and without any meditation could heal that and could put it away. Thank you very much, Aditi. I learned a lot. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I'm gonna move on. I don't want to cut anybody short, so if you have something to say it now. We are running late on time here. Okay, I do not hear anybody speaking up. Thank you again, Peter. Always enjoy having you here and sharing with us and expanding how we think and feel and just amazing. Thank you. So we're going to move on to our second half for the healing. We'll give everyone a minute or two to grab your water, grab some pictures of your loved ones that you want to have with you during the healing. So it is 11:34 Pacific Standard Time. We'll come back at 11:37 because we're already into 11:34 right now. And then we'll get right into the healing. Please remember to mute yourself when we begin on the second half. So please gather yourselves, and we'll be right back.
Bye-bye, everybody. Have a good rest of the week.
Thank you.